Excited for this second edition of Fireside Chats, and I'm joined today by Madeline Vinson, who is the founder of Process Architect. And I'm really excited about today's conversation because I think, regardless of whether you're in sales or you're in operations, you own a company or you work at a company, right? This is an applicable discussion around a lot around growth, but also how growth relates to operations and how business owners can think about growth, but also folks on the sales side can think about how they're supporting their ops team. So, Madeline, thanks for jumping in and joining me on this. And to kick things off, I'd love it if you would just give some quick background on who you are and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really cool to see you go and kind of do your thing and support people in what seems to be a growing interest in the property management industry. So I'm excited to be here. I myself, like you said, founder of Process Architect. In a sentence, we do tech consulting and implementation. So primarily focusing on tools like Lead Simple or Apply. I myself have about 5 years in property management experience. I'm based in Knoxville, Tennessee. My parents have a company. That's where I got started. They have a crazy story that I'm sure we'll get into later, but I learned most of what I know from working with them. And so now we've got a really cool team of property manager background tech people. So we're out there, not just taking your processes and implementing them, but also helping you improve them because we've been where you stand. And it's been fun learning different markets and understanding places different from, where I come from. So it's been a really fun ride. I've been doing this for about a year now.
That's awesome. Well, I love this little community that we have of consultants that have gone out and launched their own business within the last couple of years. It's kind of fun to be on that journey together.
It
Um,
is. Yeah.
and Madeline, I'm super curious. So neither of my parents were entrepreneurial at all, right? Mom's teacher, dad works in IT, and I felt from a young age like I always kind of had this drive to build something, and I started a business when I was like 15 years old. But I'm curious from your perspective, growing up in a house with two entrepreneurs, like what was that like? And when did you kind of start to realize, oh, like I get it, like this, I see myself on this path too.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny because I actually, um, maybe it was just the teenage rebellion, but I actually kind of rejected that. I was not
Yeah.
into it. I was like, I never want to own a business. I don't want to be in the day to day. My parents, so they were um entrepreneurially minded for most of my life, but they only started having a business in 2017. So they were both just high functioning people my whole life. My dad, he actually is in the consulting space for large healthcare organizations. So I've seen him kind of do that for my whole life. And then my mom actually has a background in healthcare as well. She was a critical care nurse. And so between the two of them, like both very high functioning jobs. But my mom, after she was in nursing, she was a stay-at-home mom until I graduated high school.
Yeah.
And so that going from, having her around and having both of them just being great people to them being very busy people,
Hmm.
um, I, as a high schooler, was not into it. I felt like, the business was taking my mom away. I was not for it. For a long time, I actually was, we were trying to figure out, my husband and I, like, how can we invest without having to really have like a job? I think, people have debunked that time and time again. Like, it just doesn't, there's no world in which being successful and making money is truly passive,
Sure.
no matter how many people you try and hire for it. So I really, I was not super into it until I found kind of my passion, which a lot of people might assume is tech because I am absolutely a geek. I love tinkering with things. But what I realized, even as I'm talking to operators, the last few months, my passion is not tech. It is using systems and technology to help people get their life back. I
Mm.
tell people, like, when we implemented good systems in their company, in their property management company, I got my mom back and she got her life back. And so now I get to do that for other people. We celebrate our clients when we go on vacations and all kind of stuff for the first time. And so that's been the journey that we've come on of like, first of all, what do I even want this to be? Is this a hobby job? Am I, going to do some side gigs on Upwork, or, all of a sudden I'm hiring people and, it's grown into this thing, and I'm like, where do we want to take it? And I'm really excited where we're going. But it's been a journey for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and what a great kind of origin story around, your experience, watching your mom in the business, how busy she was, and then getting to be a part of the transformation that took place. I'm curious from your perspective, like at what, you worked with Freedom for a while.
Right.
At what point did you kind of realize like, oh, this is probably a problem that other people have too, and there's an opportunity for me to go solve it. What was kind of the decision making process for you like?
Yeah. It was actually would have been 2 years ago now at Lead Simple's first user conference. So I was there. My mom was actually the speaker, and she did her presentation. It was great. And kind of toward the end of it, she kind of called me out because she mentioned like their good processes and systems and some automations that we have going. And she said something fun. She was like, if you want to come ask me about all of this later, don't talk to Madeline. She's the process architect.
Yeah.
And she called it that. Um, and so afterwards, I literally, I'm 19 years old at the time. Like I've just, I'm working with my mom, and grown adults come up to me and they're like, "Hey, can you help me with this? Like, what's going on? Like, how do I do this?" And they're like handing me business cards and like trying to get me to like look at their systems. Like, here's my laptop. Like, come look. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like
Mm.
I didn't realize that people are struggling with this. We're in the Facebook groups, and I tried to be helpful even before I started the business of just, sharing what I know.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that there was such a widespread like um, desire for better systems. Not only that, but better team adoption. A lot of our time goes towards like, we have this software that we've been paying for, and it's sitting up on this digital shelf, not getting used. And so what we come in and help with is like, you've been paying for this subscription for 18 months. Let's get some use out of it and get the team actually excited to use it. So that was kind of the beginnings of like, oh, I could really do something with this. I took on my first client like 4 months later, March of last year. And by July, I made the decision to go full time with this. So I stepped out of my position with Fig. Had somebody in that position already that I kind of trained up, and she's doing amazing now. Fig is a client of mine now, and so it's been great.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, and that's so cool that your mom used the term process architect.
I
That's
know, I know.
um,
It was great.
I love it. That's fantastic. Um, all right, so Madeline, we're gonna lean a lot on your experience in this conversation, not only at working in a property management company, but with what you do now. And to kind of kick it off, I was thinking about our conversation today, and one of the things that over my like 7 years in this industry, whether it was Filter Easy, Second Nature, right, all the way to today, one of the things that I hear all the time just in conversation with property managers is this idea that, well, I need to get my house in order before I can grow my business, or I need to
Mhm.
get operations in a good place before I grow my business. And to me, I certainly think that's a completely valid thing. But to me, it seems like it's probably kind of hard to quantify, right? Like there's not necessarily one metric that you look at and say, oh, yeah, okay, we're good now. We're ready to grow. I'm curious what you think about that. And, as you've worked with clients, like how you experience this idea that I need to organize, I need to get a solid foundation before really growing.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if you reverse engineer it, what you're asking is like, how do I keep this from being a revolving door?
Mhm.
Like how do I keep it to where, I can bring on clients without also losing clients? And when I think about that, when we were working with clients, with the last job that I had with Fig is I was primary owner relationship. So I had, all of the clients, and I had a team of 5 that I was working with on the leasing side and tenant management and application management. And the things that we always got in the most trouble for was lack of communication, um, and lack of transparency, which is similar but different. And then I think the other thing would just be speed. And so if you were to quantify it and say, like, if I have these two things, I'd be set. It's, do you have systems in place to where owners are getting the updates that they want and they can see the information when they want to see it without you having to pull a report, without you having to, send an email over? Like, do they have self-service access? The second half of it is, are our people and our systems in a place where we are delivering standardized, excellent service every time where we don't miss? And there's always things happen. It's property management. There's always fires. But if 1 week your lease renewal process takes 7 days and another week your lease renewal process takes 90, I don't think that is scalable, which means that you're going to have that revolving door issue where all of a sudden clients are not going to know what to expect from you and they're going to look for something that they can rely on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And there's almost like two extremes, I guess, when you think about it. It's like you could be so cautious about growth, right? That you're sort of a perfectionist around, like, I have to get to this point. Or, the opposite extreme, which, I think you and I both have seen, is like you grow so fast that everything is just constantly breaking. And
Yep.
these owners that you're bringing on are, it's like you said, revolving door. You're not able to hold on to anyone. Obviously, that's not a good experience or use of resources. I guess, is there a balance that can be struck? Like, if you were talking to somebody who maybe is more on the conservative side around, like, being cautious about growth, like, what would your encouragement to them be in on, how to think about that question?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing you can do, and I know you and I both follow Alex Hormozy, the easiest thing you can do is focus on who, not what. Because if you figure out your ideal client and you make sure you're hiring and working with those clients, I would bet that your workload is going to decrease significantly. There's always going to be people that need a little bit more attention than maybe we want to give, and that definition is different for every company. Some people want to have that white glove experience where everybody is getting one-to-one contact every time. Other people, there's businesses that do very well that it's more of, you know, come get it when you're interested. We'll be here when you're ready. Um, I think depending on the company that you want to run, there's a certain type of client that fits inside that. And if you're not qualifying people properly, you might get a mismatch of expectations and communication that's going to create more work than you're probably willing to put on. I think all in all, like, regardless of whether you're just starting out or if you've been in the business for 10 years, expectation setting can bypass most of the issues, because if you don't set expectations, you allow them to set them for you. And so if you say up front, this is how often we're going to communicate with you, you can expect to hear from us X amount of times per month. This is how long it takes for us to do a lease renewal, like whatever it is, set what success is supposed to look like in their mind so that they don't come in with a wrong expectation and test you against their expectation, right? I think that is a big piece that people miss. They allow them to assume what right looks like, and then they don't meet up to those expectations.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the expectation setting side, we're going to talk more about that for sure as we go here. Um, one of the things that I have a few folks that I work with that are, they are the business owner and they are responsible for sales, and they're trying to get to that critical mass, right, where they're able to start hiring. And um, I think sometimes people have this impression of the tech side, right? Specifically, tool like Lead Simple, something that is going to help organize them from a process standpoint. There's a little bit of idea of, like, oh, I'm not big enough yet to implement something like that, right? But in reality, I mean, if you were to use technology in a way that allowed you to grow more without having to hire someone or hire less, there's advantages to that. I'm just curious, as you've talked to folks who are on the smaller side and they're kind of in that initial growth phase and it seems really chaotic, right? Like, what are some of the more simple, practical things that somebody should be thinking about to help themselves, right, be able to grow and get to a more stable position where they can get some help around them?
Yeah, I think I've talked to people before. I'll say this, and I've talked to people before that they have the thought of like, a tool like Lead Simple or Apply, it's too expensive, we're not there yet. But then I look at their tech stack and they're paying the same amount of money in like 6 different subscriptions to make up the difference for one tool.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to what you're trying to accomplish. If you have a tool that is already built for you, more of your time can go towards operating and not just managing your software. You can duct tape stuff together all you want. People do very successful businesses with a good spreadsheet and some automations and Zapier. That's real. And I do tell people like start there because for the most part, you're looking at Google Sheets, which most people get included in their workspace. Like it's just not that complex. If you organize it well and then you pay, $30 a month for Zapier, you can do some pretty cool stuff in there. But outside of that, as you're looking to scale, you have to think about the opportunity cost of like, is it taking me 4 hours a day just to maintain this spreadsheet? Or can some of this be automated so that I can actually grow? I think that's when people start to go a little bit amiss. But going back to like, the size of the company versus what they should prioritize. If you're talking about growth, I would say get something in place, not even like CRM, but just really good email communication management. Just I think people there's opportunity for dropped balls when you have just volume coming in, either from tenants or owners or vendors even. I've been playing with a tool called Fixer.ai. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's phenomenal. And I think it's like $50 a month. So even just little stuff like that to start supplementing pieces of what you do. If you want to upgrade to something like a shared inbox, if you start having multiple team members, but if you're talking to an operator that has, maybe it's, themselves and then one or two others, it's okay with if you start with what would be clarified as like an add-on tool or a Chrome extension or something like that and build up from that. I don't think there's anything.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think you touched on something there that made me think of this idea that like you feel like you need to grow to get to a point to bring additional people in or to invest in additional resources. But what I see is oftentimes the problem is like, well, if you're the business owner, you have so many different priorities on your plate, and as it relates to sales, what I see most commonly get dropped is like follow up with prospects,
Mhm.
like they're good about answering the phone or doing the initial discovery conversation, right? Like close rate is actually fairly good in that sense. But the problem is like if there's any sort of follow up that needs to happen, that's what gets missed, right?
Mhm.
And to your point, right? Like you don't necessarily need a CRM. I mean, I would advocate you do in some way, even if it's just a spreadsheet.
You need something. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta have something or else, like, because I mean, I find this for myself, right? Like, my entire career was doing the selling, right? And somebody else did the fulfillment. Now that I'm doing the fulfillment, I'll have discovery conversations and realize a week later, like, oh shoot, I need to follow up with that person, right? And
Yeah.
so it's a very natural thing. But if you don't create some sort of system around how you're going to do business, really anything, but business development, right? You're not ultimately going to grow to the point that you want to grow to offload that to someone else.
Yeah. I think too, one thing I come across, and this might be niche for Lead Simple users, but um, they try to keep their CRM flow more like vibey. Like it's, when they're talking to somebody, they'll move them to a certain stage or they'll leave them there and then maybe move them to active nurture or whatever it is. And I don't know that I agree with like, I think every lead can have some level of standardization. whether it's qualification and then saying, how long should we follow up with them, and using some conditions of saying, if we said that they're hot and we're ready to start like really pushing them towards signing, put them into like a 30-day nurture campaign. Like I run into people that said like, oh, I was supposed to follow up with them a month ago and forgot to because there wasn't a reminder, there wasn't a task or
Right.
an email or, a whole drip campaign built for them that they don't even have to think about, right?
Right.
And so I think one thing that if you do have a CRM, don't buy into the lie that like it has to be more flux than a regular process does. I think there's absolutely checks
Yep.
and balances and steps you can use to help keep your team in line.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And, I tend to think that there are a lot of salespeople out there that tend to, um, they have a hard time with the CRM because it feels constraining in some way. Like, oh, I've
Yep.
got my process up here. Like, what do I need that for?
Yep.
Or even more commonly, like, well, the process that's in my head doesn't line up with what's in the CRM. And so I'm just not going to use the CRM. And I think you're
Yep.
exactly right. Like, you can create some pretty simple and basic buckets of, hey, this person needs to be followed up with over the next 30 days because they're in an active decision making cycle. Honestly, the other one that falls through the cracks is like, oh, I talked to this prospect, they're thinking about moving 6 months from now, I need to follow up with them in 3 4 months to see where they are. And it's like, if you don't have some sort of reminder set for that, it's not happening. It's just not.
Exactly. Well, and I just got done doing a big sales pipeline build for somebody, and we spent a long time because we even I was working with the BDM, which I think is important.
Mm.
I always say like build with your team and not for them, because otherwise they're not going to use it. And so we had their director of ops and we had their BDM, and the BDM was the one running the show. Like we mapped it together, and we realized what he wanted in theory, after using it for about 30 days, was not necessarily what was actually best because it created a lot of data entry and kind of homework and that kind of thing. And so we created some additional edits basically to cut down some of the steps. And it's perfect now. I mean, they went from, he might put a lead in and he might wait to put a lead in until after they've already signed an agreement because he just doesn't want to have to deal with it, to now taking somebody all the way through like when they get the lead for the first time, having their discovery call, doing an appointment if needed, and then taking them through any nurturing that needs to happen and then into onboarding. And so I think if you have something and you're like, this doesn't work the way that I want it to, most CRMs allow for the customization of like changing that. So don't ignore it. Like just take some time and invest some time to fix it so that you get the better results out of it.
Yeah. Talk to me about where you fall on, like, specifically as it relates to sales, but I'd imagine it's true across process. Like, where do you kind of fall in terms of thinking about like complexity and like all the great things that could be done versus, simplicity, easy to follow, it's not requiring a lot of brain power to operate. How do you think about that question?
Yeah. So I think the complexity needs to be there's pieces that need to be complex and there's things that don't. I think the pieces that need to be complex are like making sure if we have email templates, I would rather spend 20 minutes one time making 17 different versions of one email template than having somebody have to edit it every time they send it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like people are like, oh, that feels like such a headache. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, you have opportunity for a wrong email to go out. You have data entry, like it just the user error instead of, somebody answering, what type of email do we want to send or that sort of thing, and doing that one time and it being exactly what you want versus, everybody writes a little bit differently. And so I think if you're looking for standardization in that way, I never let people say like, oh, we'll fill in that later. I'm like, no, we're doing this now. Um, the pieces that can be a little bit more simplistic, I have one um custom like stage that I typically do. And this sound like if you're not a Lead Simple or Apply user, this would be like a column in a spreadsheet. but for lead simple and app users, I think you'd be able to follow along. I have a stage that I usually recommend that's more like inactive discussions where they're thinking about it. Maybe they're talking to a spouse or a business partner, and we just need to like touch in. I don't necessarily want like an automated thing every week because that is going to be more custom depending on their story. So we just do weekly one touch reminders that just say check in with client, check in with lead, give them a call. And so even then, you're not having to use brain power or sticky notes to remember. It's more of just internal, making sure we're touching in with them instead of this like drip campaign that people feel like they have to use.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've experienced actually recently, I did a demo with a company, looking at a product, right, for myself. And good conversation. I got an initial follow-up email, but literally every follow-up email I've gotten from them since then, and they've been consistent, right? But the reason it's been consistent is it's completely automated, and
It's all
every
Ken.
email is, yeah, it's like this canned message, and mostly like continuing to pitch their product, not like, hey, just curious where you're at in your decision making process. Do you feel like this is a good
Are
tool? And so,
you? Yeah.
yeah, I think you brought up a really good point of like sometimes even just setting a reminder to do a touch point, even if it's not an automated message or a templated email. I mean, it could be templated and there's a couple variations, right, to make it a little bit more specific. But I think people have this mindset of like, oh, I need to automate everything and I need to have a template for everything. When the reality is in sales, like this is still, it's still a relationship trust building thing. And so getting a bunch of canned emails may not necessarily build trust in my view. So
Well, and I tell people on the ops side too, you have like two sides of the pendulum. You have like, I want to automate everything and I don't want to touch anything ever again. And then you have like, I want to approve everything. I don't want any automations. This needs to be like all analog. And what I tell people on both sides is you want to automate what allows you to be a people person. So I think, especially in property management, people don't like this, but like we are in the people business. We are in the service business. It is a step away from hospitality. And you have to be okay with that. And so for the people that don't want to automate anything, we want to get them to a point where the things that we can automate, data entry, file sending, like the housekeeping of the business, right? Automate that so that you can spend more time on the phone. Automate that so that you can send custom emails to people, so that you can spend more time and appointments when you're visiting people's homes. Automate the stuff that doesn't matter as much, that increases, opportunity for human error so that you have more, stability and standardization in your business. For the people that want to automate everything, I say the same thing just in a different breath. There's things that are going to allow you to be a more effective operator if we do this one piece more manually. So if we automate 90% of an operations process and then the final touch is a phone call to the owner, I mean, the fact that you might spend one day a week on the phone with all of those owners makes up for the lost time because everything else is done for you. And so I think if you can see both sides of that and understand where people are coming from, both sides of it is, I mean, ultimately, I would say probably comes from a place of anxiety, of, lack of time or lack of control. And so if we can allow people to trust the process, to trust the tech that they're paying for, but then also trust their people to do things more manually, both of those are wins.
that's really good. I like that. Um, all right. So one more kind of like philosophical question for you around growth in general. I think that obviously door count for people is like the metric, right? Rightly or wrongly, like that's what people think about
I don't
for the
see
most
us ever getting away from this.
Yeah, it's probably not.
We tried a couple years ago, it didn't work.
Yeah. I do have some clients that are very focused on like revenue per relationship, which I think
Yeah,
is great. But
important.
yeah, I don't know how widely that'll be adopted. I'm curious from your perspective, like, okay, I have this company, right? Let's say I've made it to critical mass, right? I'm out of that like I need doors to survive phase.
Mhm.
Um, there's such wide variance of like how big do I get? Right? Like what is my actual end goal here? And
Right.
of course, there are some people that are very clear on that. I want to get to this size because it's gonna, it's kind of it's gonna be the sweet spot, right? And I'm gonna be able to be very profitable. Maybe I'm gonna sell the business, right? Whatever. But I feel like a lot of the people I talk to they don't really have a clear answer on that of where they want to get to. And I guess like if you were talking to somebody like that wants to grow but they're not sure how big they want to grow, like you've worked at a large company, like what you've seen the good and bad of getting to significant scale. How would you think about that?
Yeah. Um, so, just as a refresher, my parents' company, they started with 0 doors, obviously, and, they were investors first. They bought a portfolio over time, got up to 250 doors, with just, basically my mom and some friends of hers and my uncle doing maintenance. And, that went from, like, 2017 to late 2019. 2019, because of their investor network with all their friends, they got some requests for them to manage other people's properties. And because they were investors, I've realized how uniquely situated they were. They started taking on, one, two, three clients, but those one, two, three clients had 30, 40, 50 doors, right?
Yes.
And so all of a sudden, from late 2019 to early 2021, we went from 250 doors under management to over 1,000, 18 months.
Wow.
It was chaos in every sense of the word. The upside is that we did have fewer owner relationships to manage. I mean, I don't
Right.
know that we could have done it if we
Yeah.
had one owner for every door, right? Because that's
Right.
typically the
Right.
standard. Um, in that though, what we're realizing, so most of what they managed and owned for a long time, up until about 2 years ago, was primarily C-class properties. They really went after lower income. They wanted to provide, quality housing to people that normally look for that. I could have a whole hour-long conversation just about that side of it.
That's really
Um,
cool.
but they realized, so they had a moment maybe 18 months ago now where their staffing was really beefed up. They had about, 900 doors maybe at the time. I think 15 in office people. I mean, it was a big group of people. Systems were good. They have in-house maintenance too, and so part of it was that. And then I think it was like 2022, started selling some of their own portfolio and then buying again, as the market was, being crazy. They realized something that I think a lot of people do internally, but they don't. It takes a second for it to kick in. They went from managing less doors but making more profit because
Right.
the properties that they were buying and taking under management were of higher quality. They required less maintenance. The owners required less attention. The tenants required less attention. I mean, just if we're being honest, the tenants were easier to deal with usually. Different problems. But we were able we had some staffing transitions that were all positive, but we didn't rehire any of those roles. And so we were able to decrease our door count, which most people don't like to do, but became more profitable and decreased our staff overhead. And so they're now, I mean, their team is lean today. So they've got, I think they're like 975 doors, and it's my mom. My dad does some stuff, but my mom is broker owner. They have the person that I trained to take my role for owner relationships, and then one person stateside for resident relationships, and two people internationally for resident relationships. The rest of their team, besides their maintenance coordinator, is maintenance technicians. That's it. And so, they're back up to the door count that they want to be at. They want to grow. They actually want to get even more into like the multifamily space. But
Cool.
as a majority, like there was a season where their door count diminished. And so I go back to your original question of like, what does success even look like? I think it's more than door count. I would almost say it comes back to what's your goal as a business owner. So is your goal to be in operations all the time? Because if it is, you can do that with 100 doors or you can do that with 1,000. It depends on who you're hiring. Um, my mom, I'm begging her to hire somebody to manage accounting for her because it takes up most of her time. I think it comes down to like, what do you enjoy doing? If you have somebody who loves sales, I don't know that hiring a BDM is best for them. If that's what they love doing, hire people who can do everything else for them so that they can just go to appointments all day, you know?
Mhm.
Think if you have something that you're passionate about, this idea of like scaling to the point where you don't need to work anymore, I don't know that everybody buys into that.
Yeah,
And I don't know that door count has anything to do with that. Does that make sense?
right. Oh yeah, totally. Well, I mean, yeah, like my experience at Profit Coach is a great example of, folks that had incredibly profitable businesses
Uh-huh.
at 150 doors, right? Like, and I'd argue you could do that even with less, but you're not, you're going to have a really lean team. You're probably going to be fairly involved in the business, but you can be extremely profitable at that level. And on the flip side, I've seen companies that were huge that were not profitable, that were in the red.
Right.
So I think you're exactly right. Door count really, no. The only thing I would say about door count, I think, is, and you, I think your experience is a good example of this. Is like if you are at a certain scale, you do have some freedom of options in terms of where you want to go from there. And a good example is like you get to a certain level, you have a certain amount of revenue coming in, right? This is kind of expenses, and let's assume that labor is pretty dialed in. Um, you have the flexibility to say, okay, let's go ahead and get rid of our bottom 10% and focus on replacing that, right? When you're at 100 doors, 150 doors,
That
that's a
hurt.
little bit more, yeah, it's a little bit more of a sticky situation. So I think one of the advantages of scale is having a little bit of flexibility. Or even, you mentioned your mom getting into multifamily. Like you have resource at that point to enter a new vertical or a new
Yep.
maybe a new market, right? Hey, we want to go to a new geographic area. Having
I
scale
think
does allow you to do that a little more, I think.
it does. I think the piece that was maybe a unique struggle for us was like if we had an owner leave, we could be looking at losing 200 doors, right? In one fell swoop. And
Right.
so we had to get to a point where we were diversifying a little bit and going for, more onesie twosie call them accidental landlords. We tried that. Um and realized it just, even though from a numbers and maybe even from an operations perspective, it makes sense to do that. And I mean, there's a plethora of them out there.
Mhm.
They didn't enjoy it. It's not what they liked doing. They liked the investors. They liked the big portfolios. And so, they're pivoting again and trying to get away from that model. And, like I said, go after multifamily. And so I think this idea that there's like one way to run a property management company, I think is just false.
100%. I want to shift the conversation a little bit, Madeline, because this is I'm excited to get your thoughts around this. This is not it's not specific to any industry. I've worked in insurance and in this space selling RBP and coaching and software, right? Like one of the things that I think is universally true in most businesses is that there tends to be a little bit of tension between sales and ops. And I think this ties into kind of what we just talked about around process. And, for the salesperson, they're trying to go out, they want to make commission, right? Like they're in sales to make money, right? And achieve their goals and all that stuff. On the flip side, you have the operation side, which you just brought up a good example of this with the accidental landlords, right? There's nuance in terms of how we do things as a company and really who our ideal client is. Um, and I've experienced that it can get to a point where, there's a lot of frustration on both sides. Sales feels like ops kind of holding them back and raining on their parade a little bit. And operations can certainly feel like, man, this salesperson is just out there. they're a rebel without a cause. They're doing whatever they want, right? Bringing on whoever they want, setting horrible expectations with clients. Um, so I want to ask you, obviously you've been on the ops side in a property management company. But now also, you do sales for your company, right? And so you're kind of gauging the types of people you want to work with. Um, I guess my first, like, to kind of kick off your thoughts, like, I'm curious what you think about, like, what's kind of that point of harmony? Like, how do you get to a place where both sides, it's okay if they have differing views of the
Yeah.
world, um, but you can't live in a place where there's just constant friction happening between both sides because people are going to burn out. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that question?
Yeah. I was just talking to somebody about this that week, actually. It's funny. So I actually, for about maybe 8, 9 months, I did sales for my parents' business.
Yeah. Okay.
I hate it. It was horrible. I was not good at it, but I can say that I did it. Um, it's another thing on my resume, but um, I think what companies everywhere get wrong is your sales team and your ops team have different measures of success.
Mm.
So typically the sales team is volume versus the ops team is longevity, right? It's quality. And I think when you have two different teams trying to accomplish two different goals, you're gonna have two different results. And so we always try to align our teams with our clients' goals. And so, this wasn't sales specific, but an example, something that I think about is like, our company, we did not charge a lease up fee to our clients, which is very typical. Like most companies do like a lease up fee to clients. We charge a renewal fee because we want to incentivize our team and benefit our company when we do well and keep a tenant because it saves everybody money. And I just wonder if your commissions can be done similarly with a PMA renewal than the first time you sell them. Um, I don't know. I don't know enough about that side of things, but I know that there's a discrepancy between your ops team who is trying to keep people to stay, trying to get people to renew, trying to keep people happy, versus your sales team who, after they get that first commission check, they don't really care what happens. Like, everybody would like to think that, but I mean, the psychology behind it is like, if you're truly just in sales, you may not ever really talk to that client again post
Yeah.
agreement signing or post handoff call. And so I just wonder, if you can incentivize your team, your sales team, off of getting something at renewal and not just the first time you close them. I also think, sales, and you can probably speak to this because I might have more of a ops minded side of this is I think sometimes people hire hungry salespeople, usually younger, that also usually don't have property management experience. And so
Mm.
when you're talking about, going out to a property, if you're doing in-person appointments and you're, more traditional sales, um, these guys don't know what they're looking at. I mean, you can't, if you have somebody who can't tell a C-class property from an A-class property in the minutia of like, looking at holes in walls and, foundation cracks, and are we going to have a roofing issue in a year? Like, I think there's an ops side of this, and maybe it's a partnership between ops and sales, and you go to appointments together. But I think sending somebody green into a listing appointment and just saying, "Oh, I like this guy, we can sign him," and not looking at the property itself, I think is where a lot of people go wrong.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think it's one of the trickiest things about doing business development in a property management company, right? Um, because I think, one, it's hard to get the incentives align properly. And you touched on that, right? Where, the salesperson, they're really incentivized to close a deal versus the long-term success of the client.
Uh-huh.
And I'll quick example from my experience. Like when I worked at Second Nature, when we got a contract signed with somebody for RBP, uh, at least when I was there, I don't know what it's like now. We, salesperson didn't get anything, right? Like there's no commission for getting a piece of paper signed,
Yeah.
right? There's commission as that property manager enrolls tenants into RBP. And so when you think about the way that that incentive structure is set up, it's set up for the salesperson to continue to be invested with that person throughout the process, especially onboarding and the first 90 days. Now that doesn't mean you don't have onboarding people. Like we had onboarding specialists, but like I've probably brought this up on something before, but like Evan Howard, who is a really good friend of mine, who is at Second Nature. Him and I started a few months apart from each other. Evan would sell a deal, right? And he would be on every single onboarding call. And if a
Uh-huh.
property manager didn't show up to their onboarding call, he was calling them. He was texting them, "Hey, where are you?" He
Yeah.
was he was looking at their listings on their website to see if the RBP language was in there. And if it
Yeah.
wasn't, he was calling them. So like
Yeah.
that's the extreme of like this person is so
You're
invested
committed.
in the long-term success of that client versus okay, they signed a piece of paper, it's out of my hands. If it doesn't go well, it's onboarding's fault, right?
Right.
So I think that I don't know how many companies compensate salespeople on retention, but I think it's a fascinating question, right? Um, because your profitability um, in property management like is dependent on a long-term relationship, not
Well, and
not
that
something.
even just from a numbers perspective, I mean, from my experience working with people, like most of the time, people are paying out a commission for money that they don't have yet because that door is
Right.
not profitable
Yeah.
yet. And so if
Right.
you wait 6 months, a year, and let, rent start
That's
rolling
right.
in, that even from a numbers perspective is going to make more sense for them.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. Um, the other thing I think that in this was sort of your second point around, hey, look, there are types of properties we want and there are types of properties we don't want. There are types of owners that we want to work with and not. And so I think it makes the training of your business development person critically important, right? And a lot of companies don't have that set up internally, right? They're not equipped to train that salesperson.
Yeah.
Um,
We I mean, I've seen companies, not many, but I've seen a couple where like part of their onboarding process is like they follow one of their maintenance technicians around for a day.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
this is our properties, this is what we do, this is how we work, these are the tenants. Um, I think too, there's more commonly than not, there's a lack of a handoff between sales and
mhm,
ops in every industry. I mean, how many times have you signed up for a software and been like, where'd my sales guy go? Um,
that's
I
right.
think so like our team specifically used to do, I had a presentation. I mean, it was legit. I had a presentation. It was a 45-minute call. If they did not show up for the call, I recorded it anyways and sent it to them. That
Yeah,
presentation went over who we are, like, we showed them our org chart, who our team is, who their primary contact is, who to reach out to. We used Slack for them. And so, like, how to set up their Slack channel. We set up their accounts on the call, made sure they got into their Buildium account, made sure they got into their reports. These are what the reports mean. Like, it's not just like, this is so and so, they're taking care of you from now. It's like, hey, you shouldn't have to call us.
right,
And
right.
so that majority of that is coming from the sales team, and then the ops team is being basically beefed up from the sales team of like, hey, this is Madeline. She's been in the industry for 5 years. She's great at what she does. She's going to be taking care of you from now on. Madeline, this is Ben. Ben has, a 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom, da 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 da. I sent over the PMA this morning. He and his wife are moving out of town, so they're like it's not
Yeah.
just a transactional, it's ensuring confidence that the client has that this person knows who I am and that they're going to take good care of me.
Yeah, I think that you raise a really good point, which is, we talk about how important relationships and trust are in this business. And so if you were to really go deep on that idea, you would say, okay, I've got this salesperson, they've had all of the conversations. They are the ones that have built the trust, they have built the relationship. And now a PMA has been signed, and that person is going to disappear. And we're going to ask that client to now start all over again
Right,
and go through, like to your point, all the context that
right.
was given. Now you have to give it again to a new person. Like
Yep.
that's not a great experience for your client.
It's not. Well, and it also, I think too, you're setting your ops team for failure because they're starting at a relationship zero. And then it
Yeah.
also, I mean, how many times does the ops team, even in my company, they're like, you know, so and so keeps getting called. He's sales. Why are they calling him? They should be calling me. I'm like, because they trust him. They know that guy. They know that he knows them.
Right.
And so if you want to get rid of like the triangulation that people experience, you have to have a handoff more than just like a Loom video and a gift card. Like it's we want to make sure that this person knows who you are and knows what you do and who to call and why. I think that's it's a different expectation, I think, than what most people expect when they get on those calls. I mean, we had property owners that, would get off the call and be like, I've never been on something like this before. I'm so
Yeah.
grateful. Like I this is amazing. Um, and so it sets you apart. It's different.
Yeah. That's really good. All right, I have one last question for you, and I want you to give some advice to, let's say, specifically salespeople, but I think it could also apply to a business owner who's managing a salesperson. Let's say we've got a salesperson and they're experiencing kind of that friction with ops, right? They're bringing on doors, operations maybe doesn't like the owners they're bringing on, or the types of properties, or operations getting overwhelmed by the amount of what's coming on. In the spirit of like thinking about, okay, as a salesperson, I can control what I can control,
Sure.
right? How would you encourage that person to help make the relationship better, right? How to move closer to ops in a way that makes them feel understood and heard, right? Like putting aside like the I have a number to hit, right? Like obviously that's kind of that's not really a question for the salesperson. The salesperson's been given a goal and they've got to go do it. But I'm just wondering what are some practical things a salesperson could do to try to make that relationship with ops better?
Yeah. Um, The first thing that comes to mind, my team, like a process architect, that we always solve for first is making sure between the salesperson and the client that the ops team gets the information that they need onboarding. So, I mean, at so many times I've had people that transition from sales to ops, and the process goes, and 6 months later, we're still trying to figure out, what utility companies to use or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Right.
Like, if you want to speak their love language, give them the data. Do not let that client leave your fingertips until you have every piece of data that you're supposed to have. Uh, I think some people say, like, well, that's an ops thing. I don't think it is. I think that the sales should manage that. I think that they're still so tight in that relationship at that moment that it really should be owned by sales. And the handoff should be, this is their property onboarding sheet. Here's all the information we know, right? I think, part of ops coming in blind is they don't know anything about this property. And so I think if you can increase trust with the ops team, it's not just, hey, this is the owner, here's his favorite color. It's, this is the property, here's what you need to know, right? And so then you're not just giving the ops team problems to solve. I already have done this for you. Here you go. Um, the other piece of it, I think, is, if we're talking from a salesperson's perspective, asking questions and getting caught up on what the onboarding process actually looks like. Because if you can understand it, onboarding and post onboarding, I mean, it's what does your application process look like? I think sometimes the salespeople live in this like bubble where it's like, in theory, I know what property management is and here's how we collect your rent. But like, how often are people going to be communicated with if there's a delinquency? What does a move out process look like? How do we manage evictions, right? I think taking the initiative to find that information out and not just playing the blame game when you don't know the answers to questions, and not for just a sales perspective. Like, I think sometimes people get it wrong because they want to know just enough to where they can pitch it.
Yeah.
Understand it so that you can be a part of setting expectations, right? Don't make that ops's job. Be a
Right.
part of the expectation setting so that when you have a very fear-based client that comes in and says, well, I want to get paid on the first. Whenever my rent is collected, I want it in my deposit same day. Don't be like, oh, we can take care of that. Don't do that with it.
Right. Yeah.
And don't
Yeah.
just say, oh, I'll have to brush up on ops and make sure we can do that. Just know the facts and say, hey, I understand why you feel that. Let me tell you what we do so that you don't have to have that anxiety, right? What an empowering place to come from where you have the answers to their objections and not just having to pass it off to ops,
Right. Oh, yeah. Well, and to be able to articulate why it is that we do things the way that we do it, right? Because if a tenant or a prospective owner is like, "Well, I want to use my own maintenance techs," if as a salesperson, one, you touched
You
on
have
this,
the
you could
bullet
just say,
point, but yes and
"Yeah,
no.
sure, yeah, yeah." Like salesperson, you could say, "Oh yeah, sure, you can do that." Well, that's obviously we don't want to do that, right? Because that's going to cause a lot of problems.
Right.
Uh, the second level is, no, sorry, we don't allow our owners to do that, but with no real explanation, right? And so that just feels to the client, they're just kind of like, all right, well, they're not giving me what I want. The third level is, hey, that's not the way that we do things, and here's why, right? It's actually for your benefit that we do it this way because we've worked with hundreds of owners, we've managed hundreds of properties, and this is our we have the best practices, right? You are coming to us to hire us as your experts. So I think you're exactly right. Like, not only do you need to understand what the process is, but understand why it matters to the client. And if your approach is really just to pitch people, you're not gonna, there's not a lot of room for that in there, right? All you're gonna end up with is, we have great customer service. And it's like, okay, well, everybody has great customer
Whatever
service.
that
We're so,
means. Right,
right?
right. Yeah, yeah. It's I think it's so funny when I see sales teams come in and they're like, I had no idea. And I'm like, you've been at this business for 4 years. Like, how do you go that long without hearing your people's complaints? And I think that's where it comes back to like the broker. Make sure that you're doing like game tape. Like, are we working with our CS team and our sales team to work together to solve problems, not just on the sales team, how did we pitch them? Was your discovery call good? I think having the teams come in together and operate as one and then going back to align incentives between the two, it's really important.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's a valid point to end on too, that a lot of this does come down to leadership, right? If as a leader, if you've brought in a salesperson and you haven't trained them properly, you haven't given them a path to learn the job and learn how your company does business, that's obviously a problem. But also, um, if your management of that person is kind of just to look at, oh, yeah, I want them to bring on 10 doors a month and they're hitting that number, like, we're kind of good. Like, there's not, I can kind of be hands off. That's a really easy way to get complacent because, one, is that success sustainable, right? Like, is it going to continue? Do you have the right systems in place to continue it? And then this question on operations, like, are we bringing on the right owners that we want to work with? Your salesperson might be hitting their numbers, but 6 months later, you're finding you have a larger churn percentage than you've had historically, and you're left kind of wondering why. And if you're not close enough to what's going on, then you're not going to have a good answer.
Right.
So, well, Madeline, this has been awesome. I really enjoyed
Yep.
this
So good.
conversation, and I will. We'll have Madeline's contact information in the comments here, so you can reach out to her and find her. And really grateful for your time this morning.